right. Hardly anybody's been to more camps than me. Of course, hardly anyone's been around as long as me. Hardly anybody's seen as many sunrises as me. So, being young is not one of my attributes. Hey, how many guys think it's a little bit warm in here? Are you guys a little warm? Okay, no? How many say yeah? How many say yeah? No. No, I'm just kidding. Say yes. This is raise your hand. Okay, raise your hand. Yeah. Say yeah. Okay. All right, we're going to open some things up, but I need to get a pledge from the guys. I'm not too worried about the girls. How many guys were here about 2 or 3 years ago when the moth came in? And the boys, and they were like seniors, acted like, I don't know, 6-year-old girls. Am I exaggerating? Who was here? It was a moth. And they screamed, high-pitched screams, and they moved away. So we're going to open the place up a little bit, which means a moth might come in. Do you guys promise if a moth or some small creature comes in, a bug, a mosquito? All right, we'll leave it open until it's not hot anymore. Okay, I want to start off. Now I got your word for it, guys. Okay. I want to start off with a picture. I think you guys will recognize this person. Let's put it up. Who is that? All right. Bethany Hamilton. They made the book and the movie Soul Surfer about her life. And I think you'll recognize and remember the story. She was a teenager. She was an upcoming surf phenom. And she went surfing on Halloween Day. Never a good idea. You should stay in bed with your doors locked on Halloween. She went out and she was attacked by a tiger shark, 14-foot tiger shark, and it took her left arm. And of course, nobody thought she'd ever surf again. Everybody thought her dreams would be over. But she was in the water within 1 month. And within 1 year, she won the amateur surfing title. And within 2 years, she had attained her dream of becoming a pro surfer. And that's pretty remarkable. It is remarkable to me what people can overcome. And my heroes are people that overcome a lot. For the sake of time, I'm not going to tell you any, but I have got some just inspiring stories of people who overcome a lot. And some of you are going to have the opportunity to be overcomers. Do you know why? Because you are facing problems. You're facing difficulties. And you may walk up to a difficulty in the days to come that you don't even see coming, but there it's going to be. And some people will be crushed by those problems, and other people are going to be overcomers of those problems. And some of you are going to be inspirations to others. And I'm going to tell you tonight how you can be an overcomer. We're going to look at a story in the Bible, an incredible story of overcoming. It's about a young man named Joseph. And Joseph went on to become second in command to Pharaoh. He rose out of just terrible circumstances right to the top of the Pharaoh of Egypt. And through Joseph's leadership, hundreds of thousands of lives were saved. But before any of that happened, Joseph had to overcome 4 betrayals, 4 terrible problems. The kind of problems that crush people. Just one can crush a person, but he overcame 4. And we're going to find out how he did that. Now, Joseph's problems were common ones. They were the kind that many of you may be facing right now, but he overcame not just 1, but 4. Now, his very first disappointment or betrayal is one, I suppose, the most common one there is. Joseph was born into a family that had a lot of problems. God has an ideal for family life. It's found in here. And it's about a man and a woman who come together. They keep themselves sexually pure until marriage. They come together. They're wedded and bound together. And they stay married for life. They raise up children. They teach those children the Word of God. They raise those children up in a safe environment where people are taught respect, and they adequately provide for those children. And I want to tell you, I grew up in a home like that, and it's a wonderful experience. Some of you are growing up in homes like that, and you need to not take that for granted. You need to be grateful. But most homes today are not like that. We have alcohol and drugs and anger and violence and fighting and so many things that work to destroy homes. And even if you come from a very imperfect home, can I tell you this one thing? Make it your goal to give the gift of a biblical, godly home to your children. No matter what family you came from, make it your determination to give your children a godly home. So Joseph did not grow up in an ideal family. Now, are you ready for this? Joseph's husband. I'm getting ahead of myself. That didn't happen until this year. Joseph's father had 4 wives. And you're saying, that's not so big. No, at the same time. He had 4 wives at the same time. It's called polygamy. It's illegal in the United States. It's illegal many places in the world, but it's still practiced in some places like Africa and the Middle East. It's not God's plan, but his father had 4 wives. Can you imagine the fighting and the jealousy that went on as these 4 women had just one husband to share? Now, these 4 women had 12 sons. You can imagine the conflicts there, but it gets worse. Because Jacob, Joseph's father, loved one of those wives more than the rest. And he favored the sons of that wife above the rest. Have you ever visited or been in a home where there's favoritism? It's a terrible thing. It happens a lot now with blended families. Sometimes some kids from one side of the family are favored more than others. Well, that's what happened to him. There's a statement that says people get stepped on in step families. And I think a lot of you guys know that's true. So that was Joseph's first betrayal. He had family problems. His first betrayal or his first wound came from his parents. Now, he loved his parents, and I'm sure they loved him, but they didn't have a biblical family. They didn't know how to produce a safe home, but it was instead a dangerous place, a violent place. Now, he had another problem. So that was the first betrayal. The second problem was his brothers. His stepbrothers hated him. Genesis 37:4. Oh, there's one thing I need to tell you. Remember I said that Jacob loved one of his wives more and favored those kids? Joseph was one of the favored kids. In fact, he and his brother were the babies of the family, and they were favored. So watch this, Genesis 37:4. His brothers saw that their father loved him, that is Joseph, more than all the other brothers, and so they hated him, and they could not speak to him on friendly terms. And so they saw that he was favored, and they hated him. They could never say anything nice to him. They bullied him incessantly. He was always bullied. And he was young, and he was small. But he found his comfort in God. He learned how to turn to God. And God gave Joseph 2 dreams. And these dreams that God gave Joseph told Joseph about a wonderful future, a wonderful plan that God had for him. And Joseph held on and never forgot those dreams. His brothers resent. Oh, he made one mistake, though. It's a big mistake. He told his brothers the dreams that God gave him. And that just made them hate him more. You see, they were miserable, and they wanted to make him miserable. So they turned up the heat. They turned up the bullying. One day, Joseph's brothers were sent out by their father to go and take care of the sheep. It was about a day's journey away. Because Joseph was younger, he was kept at home. And after about a week, the father decided that he was going to send Joseph out to check on how his brothers and the sheep were doing. Watch what happens as Joseph begins to approach his brothers who are watching the sheep. 37, verse 18. When they saw him from a distance, and before he came close to them, they plotted against him to put him to death. They said to one another, "Here comes that dreamer. Now, then come and let us kill him and throw him into one of these pits. And we'll tell our dad a wild beast devoured him. Then we'll see what becomes of his dreams." So they hated him enough to kill him. But then one of his brothers, one of the oldest ones, had an idea. They said, "Why should we kill our brother? That's a pretty hard thing to do. Why don't we sell him to the slave traders, and that way we'll get money. We're not going to get anything if we just kill him and throw him in a pit." So they sold him to some slave traders who were camping nearby. Now they had to tell their father something, so what did they tell him? Verse 18 now. Or verse 31. So they took Joseph's tunic or coat, and they slaughtered a male goat, and they dipped the tunic or coat in the blood. And they sent the varicolored, it was a multicolored coat. It was a very expensive one his father had given him. And they brought it to their father, and they said, "Look what we found. Please examine this to see whether it's your son Joseph's coat or not." And so Jacob examined it and said, "It is my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." And so here's Joseph now. He has been betrayed by his brothers. He's been sold into slavery. And his father, who he loves and who loves him, thinks he's dead. So his second betrayal was from his brothers. And so his parents had failed him. They hadn't created the right kind of home that he needed to grow up in. It wasn't safe. It was just a mess. His brothers had betrayed him. He's being sent out of his homeland. How many of that cuts deep? You see, the story could have ended right there. He could have spent his whole life broken and bitter. He could have stopped believing in God and been angry with God, but do you know what? That's not what happened. You see, Joseph looked beyond his circumstances. He remembered all the comfort he'd found in God during earlier tough times. He remembered the dream God had given him. And so he decided that God was big enough to bless him and love him no matter where he wound up. Well, the next thing that happened is those slave traders got down to Egypt, and they sold Joseph to a rich, powerful Egyptian man named Potiphar. But rather than quit and feel sorry for himself, he decided to see what God could do with him as a slave in Potiphar's house. Genesis 39, verse 2 through 4. "And the Lord was with Joseph, so he became a successful man. And he was in the house of his master Potiphar the Egyptian. Now his master saw that the Lord was with him, and how the Lord caused all that Joseph did to prosper in his hand. And so Joseph found favor in his master's sight." In other words, he became his favorite servant. And he became his personal servant. And he made him overseer over everything in the house. And all that he owned, he put in his charge. In other words, when the master left for a long trip, guess what? Joseph was in charge of everything. Now, Joseph did not ask to be in Egypt. He did not ask to be a slave. He didn't want any of that. And yet, he let God bless him right where he was. Rather than feel sorry or get angry, he lifted up his eyes and he prayed, and God found him. You see, there's nothing that can happen to a Christian that can keep that Christian away from God's love. You can betray a Christian, you can throw him in a pit, you can sell him as a slave, you can take him to a foreign land, but God's love and God's blessing can still find that person. Well, there's another betrayal, and this one comes from a woman. Genesis 39, verse 6. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. That's a phrase we don't use a lot. How many know a picture's worth 1,000 words? Handsome in form and appearance. Thomas, would you stand up? In case you wonder what handsome in form and appearance is. That's it right there. Okay, let's keep reading. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. And it came about after these events that his master's wife looked with desire at Joseph. She thinks he's hot. And she said, lie with me. And as she spoke, and so she said, lie to me. And not just once. What does it say? She said it to him day after day. But he did not listen to her to lie beside her or be with her. He did not cheat on his master. See, even though he'd had a tough life, even though his life had been very unfair, he didn't use that as an excuse. Rather, he'd said, I will not sin against God. I will be loyal to God. You see, God is not only Lord of the universe, He's Lord over your body and my body. So many people, even Christians, think it's my body. I can do whatever I want. No. The Bible says that God purchased our bodies with the blood of His Son. That's what the Bible says. Therefore, it says, glorify God with your body. So He would not cheat with her. He did the right thing. Verse 11 and 12, watch what happens. Now, it happened one day that he went into the house to do his work. And none of the men of the household was there inside. So it was just her and him. She has her moment. And so she caught him by his garment and pulled him. After all, he was just a slave. She was the master of the house. She pulled him towards himself, and she said, lie with me. And as she spoke, and he left his garment in her hand, and he fled, and he went outside. Now, day after day, she'd spoken to him, but this day she grabbed him, and she grabbed onto his coat, and he just ran right out of it. And she's sitting there left holding the coat. And he fled. He ran away. Now, most young Christians don't do that. They don't run away from temptation like that. But when he realized that the temptation was strong, he just left his coat behind and ran out of there. You know, we would stay out of so much trouble if we would just run away from temptation instead of playing around with it. I lost from 17 to 23 because I didn't run from temptation. I thought, I can handle this. I can go to this party, I just won't drink. I can be with these people and we'll go and I just won't smoke pot with them. I didn't run. I was afraid of what they would think. It was too inconvenient not to be with these guys. And so sooner or later, I fell because I didn't flee. Now, what are you going to do when you're at someone's house? You're there with 3 or 4 guys and somebody shows up and pulls out a joint. I'm sure for many of you, that's already happened. Or you're at somebody's house and out comes the alcohol or something else. What are you going to do? Are you willing to just get up and leave? How about if you get up to leave and all your friends stay behind? You came into that party with somebody and you get up to leave and you're still there. What are you going to look like? Are you willing to do what he did? Because he fled out of there. Now watch what happens, because here comes the betrayal. Verse 16. So she left his garment beside her. She just sat there on the couch or on the bed or wherever she was, and she just waited with that garment there. And she said this. She spoke to him these words. That Hebrew slave, Joseph, whom you brought to us, he came in to make sport of me. In other words, he tried to attack me. And I raised my voice and I screamed, rape! And he left his garment beside me and he fled outside. Is that what happened? Not in the least. And so this is the next betrayal. Listen. Now listen to this. She said she loved him. She said they would be happy together. She said that she cared about him. She said she cared about him more than her own husband. But then she just changes like that. And she tries to destroy his life. How does that happen? You think you have friends, or maybe a girlfriend or a boyfriend, and all of a sudden they become like your worst enemy. Or you you grow up and you grow up and you guys are friends, and then your friends kind of turn against you. Well, that's what happened here. Another betrayal. But Joseph knew how to find comfort in God. In that situation of being falsely accused, he gave his heart to God again. But this all led up to the fourth betrayal. Are you ready? Because watch what happens now. Verse 19. Now when his master heard the words of his wife, and I wonder, I bet he knew what his wife was like, but he chose to believe her anyway. He knew what Joseph was like, that he was an honest man. I bet he knew what his wife was like. He probably knew what the truth was. I wouldn't be surprised. But how many of you know it was a lot easier to side with his wife? Now when his master heard the words of his wife, which she spoke to him, saying, "This is what your slave did to me," his anger burned. And so Joseph's master took him and put him into the jail, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. And there he was in the jail. Now, Joseph had done the right thing. He had served his master and made him a lot of money. He had refused to get involved with his wife. And yet what happened to him? Well, there was a knock on the door, and it was the Popo. And then they took him to court, where this guy who was innocent was found guilty, and then he was thrown in jail, which is a place where only guilty people are supposed to be. The system screwed him. The system failed him. And that was the fourth betrayal. All these things that were supposed to protect him, the police, the courts, all those things, they all failed him. And sometimes the system fails. Even things that are supposed to be good, like school, like foster care, like family court, like the police, all these things that are supposed to be in place to help us. Sometimes, I've talked to a lot of people that have really been hurt in foster care. And that's what happened to him. The system failed him. Everyone and everything failed Joseph. His parents failed to give him the home he needed. His brothers betrayed him. Here he is. He is in jail. He is a slave without any rights. Is there anybody in here that would like to change places with Joseph? He's hundreds of miles from home, and all his family thinks he's dead. There's nobody who cares for him, and he's got no hope of ever getting out in the natural. Is there anybody that thinks that their life can even hold a shadow to this man's life? Joseph could have been bitter. He could have quit. How many think 99.9% of people would have rotted in jail, just angry and bitter? But Joseph didn't. You see, Joseph still believed that God had a purpose. He still believed the word of God that his parents had taught him. He still believed the dreams that God had given him. And so he sought the face of God. And once again, as always, he served God in that place, and he let God bless him right there in prison. Look at what happened now. Verse 21 through 23. But the Lord was with Joseph and extended kindness to him and gave him favor in the sight of the chief jailer. And the chief jailer committed to Joseph's charge all the prisoners who were in the jail, so that whatever was done there, he was responsible for it. You see, I'm sure when he first got in there, the first days and weeks were horrible. But he served God. He had the right attitude. The chief jailer noticed it and put him in charge. You see, jail can't stop God from blessing somebody. Nothing can stop God from blessing somebody. God's favor can reach anybody that loves Jesus. And the greatest champions and the greatest overcomers are the people who remember that no matter what circumstance they find themselves in. Now, 4 times Joseph had been terribly betrayed. The miracle is that it didn't end in that jail. You see, because after 2 more years, Pharaoh, and Pharaoh is just the Egyptian name for king. The Pharaoh was just the king of Egypt. He had a couple of dreams. And these dreams bothered him horribly. and he couldn't sleep. He knew they were from God, and he knew they were significant, and he had to have the answer to them. And they were weird dreams. How many know weird dreams can be weird? In the first dream, there was these 7 really, plump cows. And they're standing next to the Nile River, and they're just eating and getting plumper. And then all of a sudden, these 7 straggly, horrible-looking, emaciated cows come up out of the Nile and gobble up the healthy ones. And then he has another dream. There are 7 wonderful, plump ears of corn. And then growing right up next to it are these 7 withered, horrible, ears of corn, and they go up and they eat the other ones. And he can't sleep, and he can't get any peace, and no one can give him the answer. And then a cupbearer, one of his associates, one of his advisors, who had been in jail with Joseph, remembers that when he was in jail, he'd had a dream, and it had bothered him, and Joseph had been able to interpret it for him, because God gave Joseph the interpretation. And so he says to Pharaoh, he says, I know a guy that when I was in jail, God gave him the interpretation of my dream. And so Pharaoh sends for him, and right out of the jail comes Joseph to the palace to stand before Pharaoh. And he interprets the dream. Verse 25. Now, Joseph said to Pharaoh, Pharaoh's dreams are one and the same. In other words, both dreams mean the same thing. God has told Pharaoh what he's about to do. Behold, 7 years of great abundance are coming in all the land of Egypt. And after there will be 7 years of famine. And the abundance will be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and famine will ravage the land. So Joseph had the interpretation for what the dream meant. There was going to be 7 great years, and then there's going to be 7 terrible years of famine. But even more than that, God gave Joseph the wisdom on what they should do. And we read this, verse 34. So here's Joseph's advice. Let Pharaoh take action and appoint overseers in charge of the land, and let them exact a fifth or 20% of the produce like a tax in the 7 years of abundance. Then let them gather all this extra food of these good years that are coming and store up the grain for food in cities under Pharaoh's authority, and let them guard it. And then when the famine comes, there'll be food and people won't starve. And Pharaoh thought to himself, I need to put the best man in charge that I know of. Who is it that solved the puzzle of dreams? Who is it that had the wisdom? Who is it that I just found out has been running all my prisons so efficiently? He said, Joseph, you're the man. And so he took Joseph out of prison and put him in his right hand as the second in command of all of Egypt. What an amazing turnaround. Finally, the dream that God had given him was fulfilled. But those were 13 of the toughest years, from about the age of 17 to about the age of 30. He held on to God's dreams through the worst trials and the worst difficulties you can imagine. You see, other people's actions and words can't stop God's plans in your life. They can't stop God's blessing in your life. You see, Jacob's brothers had betrayed him, but God used that to get Jacob to Egypt. Potiphar and his wife had made him a slave, but God used that to teach Joseph all about management and finances. And then they betrayed him, and he was sent to jail. But God used that to introduce him to the cupbearer, the advisor to Pharaoh, and one day get him in charge of Pharaoh. And God used the time in jail to create in him the ability to manage great things. How did Joseph overcome? What was it that Joseph knew that you and I should know? It's in Romans 8:28. And we know that God can cause all things, not just the good things, all things, even the bad things, even the tragic things, even the hurtful things. He's so big, he can cause all those things to work together into like a tapestry to bring out good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. Listen, Joseph was called according to God's purpose. God made every one of those bad things turn out for good in his life. Joseph was able to not only save tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people, he was able to save his family. Had he not been in Egypt, his father that he loved, all his brothers, everybody would have died. He was reunited with them. He forgave his brothers. He was reunited with his father, and he saved all their lives. You see, never forget, God can use every negative as a positive. What a great example Bill Wilson is of this. Bill Wilson, his dad was an alcoholic, left when Bill was young. His mom was an alcoholic. She was a prostitute. She was a barmaid. She left him on a street corner, on a culvert when he was 12, never came back. Bill had a cleft palate. If you know what that is, he had to have a number of surgeries. He had rickets. He had so many negatives in his life. And it was because of all those negatives that he's been able to touch so many thousands of people's lives. So what was Joseph's secret? He overcame 4 terrible setbacks. He fulfilled God's purpose. What was his secret when so many people are destroyed by just one problem half as bad as what he faced? Well, the secret is in the story if you know where to look. Because the secret that he knew, the secret that made him overcome, the secret that could allow you to overcome, the 2 secrets, they're hidden in the story. They're in what he named his sons. Let's look at what he named his sons. Verse 51. So Joseph named the firstborn Manasseh, for he said, God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household. The word Manasseh means to forget. And the first secret that he learned is that God taught Joseph to forget his problems, to forget his betrayals, to not focus on them so that he could focus on something else. Do you know there are many young people who are so consumed by their problems? They're so focused on their problems that it consumes their life. And the first secret here is to forget it. Just let it go. Something bad happened. You were treated badly. You're in the middle of a bad situation. But do what Joseph did. Look up. God has opportunities that you'll never see until you stop focusing and being consumed by your problem. Lift your eyes up to God, and then you'll see all the opportunities. God's bringing new people into your life. He's bringing leaders into your life. This church is a great opportunity. For many of you, Youth Venture is a great opportunity. But God has opportunities, and a lot of people are going to miss out on everything God has for them at camp because they're angry, or they're depressed, or they're consumed by their problem. Number 2, by the way, why would you name your sons after the 2 greatest secrets that you learned in life that allowed you to overcome? Do you know why? Because every time you call your son to breakfast, to dinner, to get back up there and cut the back lawn like I told you, every time you call their name, you're reminded of the 2 most important things you ever learned in life. One is to let God just make you forget so you can focus on something new. And number 2, the second son, what was his name? He named the second Ephraim, for he said, God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. Say, in the land of my affliction. Ephraim means doubly fruitful. It means overwhelmingly blessed. Because the second secret is that Joseph allowed God to bless him in the land where he was unfairly treated, in the land that he didn't choose, in the place he didn't want to be, in the place he was betrayed. He let God overwhelmingly bless him in that place. Instead of feeling sorry for himself, he chose to seek God right where he is. He found the things to be thankful for. He found what God was doing and he focused on that. I want to ask you a question. Think about your life. Is God big enough to bless you right where you are? He blessed Joseph even though Joseph didn't have a perfect family. Even though Joseph had some hard. Is God big enough to find you and bless you no matter what your problem is or your difficulty? And the second thing is, are you willing to let God bless you right where you are? The place that God wants to bless you is right where you are. Nothing has to change before God blesses you. Nothing has to change. You don't have to have him answer any prayer before you can let him love you. Nothing has to change. A lot of times you think, well, until this changes and this changes, I guess I'm just messed up. Until this changes, I can't be happy. Nothing has to change. You can start right now with letting God bless you. I want to ask you guys a question. Make sure I'm talking to the right audience. I'm going to just wrap it up here in just a moment. But here's my question. How many of you have a problem in your life? Something that you worry about, something that makes you feel defeated or depressed. Let me see your hands. How many of you guys have a significant problem in your life? That's a lot of people. You can put your hands down. The first step in dealing with the problem is being willing to be honest about it. And, if we're afraid to face it, or we're afraid for anybody to know what it is, then we'll never defeat it. I wonder tonight, how many of you are willing to be honest with your situation in this place before God, believing that God is bigger than your situation, that he's bigger than your problem? In just 1 minute, I'm going to ask that question again, because I want to believe there are some people in here that didn't raise their hand, that are afraid there's no hope or there's no answer or they're too proud. But they do have some struggles that are holding them back, some things they're like blackness in their life. I'm going to ask it one more time. How many people in this room really have something they need to give to God and get free of? Let me see your hands. Okay. You can put them down. When God delivers us, sometimes it's instantaneous, and sometimes it's over a period of months and even years. How he does it and how long it takes is not the issue. The issue is that he does it. I'm going to invite the band to come up here. And I'm going to encourage you or challenge you guys to do something. And what that is this. I want you to do something concrete before God. There's some black paper up here. It's on these tables. Why don't we move these two tables just down just a little bit? And there's pencils on them. And I want you just to write what it is that's got you down. What your big struggle. No, that way. Yeah, I want to leave this front open. I don't want this. Yeah, there you go. Thank you. I want you just to write it. I want you to write it on there, and I'll tell you why. Because I want you to give it to God. I want you to write that thing down, whatever it is that's got you down, whatever it is that you're worried about, whatever is the big problems of your life. And I want you to write it there on this black paper because it's a heavy black thing. And I want you, we'll just call this the an altar. We'll just make this an altar tonight. And then just come and just give it to God. Don't flip it up here. Just with a prayer saying, God, I am going to give you this problem. It's too big for me. I'm going to give it to you. And then I'm going to believe that you have it. And then don't come back up here and take it home with you. Leave it there. But I do want you to take something home. I've got something here that's to represent a jewel. And this represents the promises and the purpose that God has for you. You've been carrying this, you've been focused on this, and God has a new life. God has His presence, His blessing, His promise. I want you to put this up here and not get it again. And then I want you to take this home, put it in your pocket. And every time this week, tomorrow, the next day, you start thinking about that problem, you start getting defeated about that problem, you just reach into your pocket and you just feel that gem. And you just remember that this night at Pine Valley Bible Camp, you followed in the footsteps of Joseph. You gave God your worst problems, the things that you thought there's no solution for, and you picked up His promises that no one can ever steal from you. And that even if there's some bumps in the road, and even if it takes some time, you're going to hold on to what God has. Would you all stand up? We're going to go ahead and sing a song. I'm going to put these so-called jewels right here in the front. I want you to, when you fill those cards out, there's 3 tables there, 3 tables there. We need to get some of the papers over on that back table. And then just come up. You don't have to do it all at once. We're going to sing a song, so you can take your time. And then come up and take one of these jewels and take it home and let it be a reminder in your pocket that you left something behind and that you're going and you're taking something new.